Well, hello everyone. My name is Brandon Doggett, and this is my new podcast called The Brief. I'm super excited that you are joining me here today. Now, we have a lot to talk about in today's first episode, where we're going to be talking about the 2025 special elections. So, let's look at the big picture here and why these elections mattered. Right? This was the very first show on how the majority of the American public felt about Donald Trump's second term. There was record voter turnout in cities and suburbs, and it sparked a lot of engagement between the cost of living and polarization in politics. So this was a major test. It's the first major test for Democrat and Republican strategies ahead of the 2026 midterms, right? We are just under a year away from the 2026 midterms, and this is super important for both parties to get an idea on where their bases stand. So let's talk about the winning candidates. The first one, arguably the most consequential, would be Zoran Mamdani, New York City mayor. So he is age 34, and he is the first Muslim, first South Asian, and first Democratic Socialist to win the New York City mayor's race. He was born in Uganda, and he was raised in Queens, and he was previously a state assembly member. Now, his campaign focused on a lot of different things, mainly universal child care, rent freezes, free public transportation, which received a ton of backlash, higher minimum wage, and taxing the wealthy. Another one of his major talking points was government-run grocery stores. That was something that the Republicans used to sort of criticize him, and that was kind of one of their running points between Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa. That's how they kind of were combating him. Both of them ended up losing, of course, because Mamdani will become New York City's mayor. So he overcame a lot of negative campaigning from conservative figures as well as President Trump himself, calling him a communist. So he defeated Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa. Cuomo was an independent. He actually originally ran against Mamdani in the Democratic primary as a Democrat, but after he lost, he switched parties and decided to run as an independent. And then Curtis Sliwa is the Republican in this race. He as in Mamdani, was able to energize a youthful and a progressive electorate, and he really utilized his social medias and had a very prominent digital outreach, which targeted the young people of New York City, and that is a lot of what actually helped him to win this election. So that is the first major consequential win of last night, the New York City mayoral race. Now, let's move on to Virginia, because they just got their first female governor, Abigail Spanberger. Now, a little bit of background on her. She's a 3-term congresswoman. She's a former CIA agent, and she, like I said, is the first woman to govern Virginia. Now, it should be noted that she was competing against another female in the race for the Virginia governorship, so even if the Republican had won, there would still be the first female to govern Georgia, but since she won, she's the first woman to govern Georgia. So she had a very pragmatic moderation. She even said it in her victory speech, choosing pragmatism over political ideology, political parties. So she's had what's known as kitchen table economics, support for federal workers, and opposition to Trump-induced polarization. She was a huge champion of bipartisanship, backed by both labor and suburban voters, and the result was that it flipped Virginia blue again. And this came after, obviously, they had Governor Glenn Youngkin, who is still the governor, but will soon not be, and she delivered a sort of message of inclusion and stability within Virginia. Another important governor's race that we had was in New Jersey. We had Mickey Sherrill. Now, a little bit of background on her. She was a Navy veteran. She was a former congresswoman, and she will become the second woman to govern New Jersey. She ran on public investment in mass transit, economic security, and protecting social services like the Gateway Tunnel, which a lot of Republicans, including Trump, did not want to send federal funding for. She defeated the Republican Jack Ciattarelli, which who he was backed by Trump actually, and the result is this will be the third straight Democratic gubernatorial win in New Jersey, which is very interesting. There are some other notable results that didn't make the national headlines, such as in Georgia, where Democrats claimed the Public Service Commission seats for the first time since 2006. Peter Hubbard and Alicia Johnson, who emphasized fair energy pricing. And then in Minnesota, we had Democrats strengthen state Senate majority, flip and defend vulnerable seats. In Pennsylvania, Democrats held high-profile judge seats, prevailing against significant GOP funding. So let's take a look at the messaging and the strategies behind these campaigns, because across all victories, cost of living dominated as the central issue, even before the classic culture war topics would come up. I mean, the cost of living, we see it in the exit polls, is the number one issue that is on Americans' minds, the economy and cost of living. So Democrats succeeded with a mix of progressive and moderate messages that presented a more unified opposition to Trump's economic and political approach, yet staying relevant to their locality, where they're from, what they're representing. Both nationalized and local campaigns leveraged rapid response digital outreach. This is most notable in Zohran Mamdani's campaign. Now, I want to go back to Mamdani for a second here, because his victory speech has been criticized heavily. We see the difference between his victory speech for winning the Democratic primary back in June to winning the mayoral race in November. So we had a very celebratory and base-driven speech here. He invoked socialist figures and celebrated coalition victories. But what reigns different here is that he dismissed opponents and he spoke directly to the enthusiastic supporters, and he rarely mentioned or addressed non-supporters. Now, this drew sharp lines and, of course, energized allies, but critics and many non-voters felt further alienated by this speech. Now, if we take a look at Abigail Spanberger's speech, she's the governor-elect of Virginia. She had a broader tone aimed at all Virginians. Like I said earlier, she said, "We chose pragmatism over partisanship." She called for healing, unity, and practical governance, directly appealed to voters across all party lines. And I think that's super important here. We know that political victory speeches can heal or widen divides. Mamdani's base-first style was compared to Trump, almost. It sounded very Trump-like. Spanberger's speech followed the tradition of unifying voters, whether they voted for her or not. So is it more effective to double down on your base or reach out to all of your constituents? I personally think it's the latter. Reaching out to all of your constituents shows that you are ready to govern whoever are your constituents and whatever side of the political spectrum they lean on. And I think that's very important. So what do these results mean? Well, Democrats had a big success in this election cycle. We had Mamdani, Spanberger, Sherrill. They provide a model for 2026, yet expose risks of division in messaging, right? With Mamdani's messaging to Spanberger's messaging, there was a lot of difference between them. And so, of course, we know that economic instability offers a prevailing issue strong enough to obscure traditional divides. We saw this with President Biden, former President Biden, who claimed incorrectly that the economy was doing great, yet we did not see that in the grocery stores. And that is exactly how Trump won. He won because he was honest and frank, saying that, no, prices were not down, and I'm going to do X, Y, Z to bring them down. Although they haven't been brought down yet, if I'm being quite honest. In fact, they are actually up 1.2% from when he took office in January of 2025, which is an interesting number. So I want to hear from you guys on what you think resonates more. Mamdani's clear side-taking or Spanberger's bridge building? Will Democrats even keep this momentum that they have, or does This fractured message create risk in the next election cycle. 2026 will be huge. It will be huge. The Democrats have a chance to flip the House if they can do it correctly. But that's only if they can do it correctly. So I want to hear your reactions to the speeches and this election in general, and which winning narrative felt most authentic. Was it Mamdani or was it Spamberger? And what do you guys want me to cover next? This has been a short episode. This I put together sort of on the fly, if I'm being quite honest with you. But I had to get this out because it is very important to discuss the messaging in this election cycle, even though it was a special election. So I want to hear your feedback, what else you want to hear from me. And of course, make sure to subscribe so you can hear all of my episodes. I'm very excited about this new endeavor I'm going on. Of course, we have the brief newsletter on my Substack, brandondoggett.com. And you can follow me on Twitter, x.com, or X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, x.com/BrandonDoggett, Instagram.com/BrandonDoggett, all the platforms I'm there. But yeah, make sure to subscribe to my Substack because that's where you'll get the long form analytical debriefs, basically, and me discussing in longer form what exactly is going on in the state of our politics. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, provide any feedback you want. And I'm excited for this podcast to start taking on a regular schedule, and we'll actually be talking about things. I hope to invite some guests on. So thanks for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode.